Validity and qualitative research. In this screencast, we will be going over material covered by Maxwell, who introduces the concept of validity in the context of qualitative research and provides some linkages to some of the terminology you've read about quantitative research. This material is in addition to what has been provided in the text, so it supplements the text and adds more depth to what the text provides around validity and qualitative research. All right, let's get started. What we're dealing with here when we're evaluating validity of qualitative research isn't necessarily zeroing in on the methods and the details and asking ourselves, did they control for this? Is the sample representative? We're evaluating the outcome of the research. We're looking at the account that's been generated, the understanding of the phenomena, and the account that results is our primary focus for evaluation. And what that means, why we do that is because we acknowledge that not all possible accounts of some individual situation, phenomena, activity, text, institution, or program are equally useful, credible, or legitimate. And so the description that emerges, the overall interpretation that a qualitative inquirer develops in their as a result of their analysis can differ in terms of its usefulness, its credibility, and legitimacy. And so validity of qualitative research is all about asking ourselves whether or not we trust or we think that that description of the account is good enough. So based on that foundational sort of understanding that we're evaluating the accounts, a fellow by the name of Maxwell came up with five types of validities that we might apply to qualitative research. And the first is descriptive validity. And this is that simple idea of, is the data that's been collected factually accurate? So we need to have evidence that the researcher is not making up or distorting the things they see or hear. We need to know whether or not the reports that the participant makes or that an informant makes are correct, that things were not misheard or mistranscribed or misremembered. And so it's about, how did that data get produced? How did those accounts, how did those narrative descriptions, those interviews actually get produced in order to be analyzed? Then it's not a focus on the interpretation at this point. It's a focus on simply the activities around collecting the data. And so this is where we turn to interpretive validity. Essentially, now we're trying to evaluate whether we trust the account's interpretation of the meaning and activities that have been described. So the participants that are being studied, they don't always know their own feelings, and they may recall them inaccurately, they may distort or conceal their views. And so how does the interpretation that the researcher comes up with actually account for all of this? And this is what we evaluate here. Theoretical validity refers to an account's function as an explanation as well as a description of or interpretation of the phenomenon. So is the account a valid theory of some phenomenon? Are the concepts employed to characterize the phenomenon valid? Are the postulated relationships between the concepts valid? So in contrast to descriptive and interpretive validity, where the issue is accuracy, in theoretical validity, the issue is appropriateness. And so this is where other literature is often brought into the conversation, and we're judging whether or not we see an alignment or a match between the interpretation a person comes up with and the theory they're trying to build. So generalizability does make its way into the conversation of validity and qualitative inquiry. However, it's a little different. It's talking about whether or not that theory you develop can be generalized to similar types of situations or populations of persons. So it's not necessarily about whether our results will generalize to the universe of people that exist. It's more about how useful the theory that's being developed is in terms of describing the phenomena beyond just the people who happen to be involved in the study. So there are two types of generalizability, internal and external. Internal involves this generalizing within a community, group, or institution, and that can be very important and enlightening for program evaluation purposes, where you're trying to establish the particular culture of an institution or organization, and this would readily apply to a lot of faculties, but you don't think that whatever you develop for your faculty will necessarily apply to even other faculties in your similar discipline, because of the host of different factors that come into play in developing that specific culture for the context in Edmonton in this faculty or in that faculty. And so you can limit yourself to judging an account based on its internal generalizability for that context. Then researchers might want to try to extend their generalizability to other communities or groups of institutions. And an example might be where you study multiple cases of faculties of medicine or nursing, for example, and you try to develop some general theory of how those institutions and those faculties develop a culture, or the way their culture works. Finally, there's the idea of evaluative validity. This involves the application of an evaluative framework to the objects of the study. It's less central to qualitative inquiry than the first four, because many researchers don't actually try to evaluate the things they study. So it's where you have come in with a predetermined set of outcomes, and you're trying to establish whether or not your research study has achieved those outcomes. And then program evaluation is the world where this applies most obviously. So how do qualitative researchers apply these concepts to their research and in evaluating other people's research, other qualitative research? Well, they do it in a much less direct way. Essentially, every account is unique, and it brings its own questions about trustworthiness and what needs to be focused on in terms of validity. And so as you're developing a study, you're going to try to design your methods so that you eliminate these anticipated and even unanticipated biases, like in terms of descriptive validity and inferential validity. But what ends up happening is that the researcher explains their experiences that they're bringing to the table, the experiences that their participants are bringing to the table, and then very clearly tries to situate their interpretations and their descriptions of the account within those biases, and allows those to be transparent, so that as you're reading the results, you understand where they're coming from and can process them accordingly.